We're just waiting for some folks to come on into the room. This event is being recorded. It is also being set up on live on YouTube for later viewing. So anyone who wants to view the meeting can either do so on YouTube later, or there will be a recording offered afterwards, which will be sent to all participants along with a copy of the slides. So we're just going to wait for a few more minutes for everyone to enter the room. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We know everyone's time is valuable. My name is Scott Smith. I'm the Chief Communications Officer with the Cook County Assessor's Office. Joining me today are my colleagues, Gina Mattison, who is our legal counsel, and Tasha Gibbons, who is our Chief Legal Officer. We're going to primarily review the appeal rules changes for 2022. And we're going to view a couple other things, but some brief housekeeping things before we get started. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, so please leave any questions that you have in the Q&A box. You'll see a chat box and a Q&A box. Please leave your questions in the Q&A box. It's a little bit easier to manage the questions that are coming in and making sure that we answer everything if you leave it in the Q&A box. We're going to review some new information for 2022 that includes appeal rules, some changes to the data subscription, along with some changes to the online appeal system. One thing we won't be covering today are any new information about the North Suburban reassessment. We know many folks are interested in finding out when that will get started. We anticipate that happening within the next couple of weeks. We don't have a specific date for you at this point, but if you go to the appeals calendar, you can see the sort of first sets of towns that we anticipate will begin the North Suburban reassessment. And as I mentioned, we will have slides and any follow-up answers after this event, which we will email to folks. We do anticipate having a couple questions that we may not be able to have immediate answers for, but if that's the case, we will send those after the presentation once we've had a chance to get some answers together. So with that, I'm going to give it over to a relatively new addition to the Cook County Assessor's Office, Gina Mattison, who will be guiding you through the 2022 appeal rules today.
Hey everyone, I'm Gina Mattison. Some of you may already know me. I just started with the assessor's office this year. My background is that I worked for a title insurance company for a while. Then I worked for one of the big two foreclosure firms in the state of Illinois, and I managed their default title department, basically title clearance on default mortgage foreclosures. And then most recently, I worked for one of the premier local property tax appeal firms. And so I know that hopefully I can, I'm able to help you answer questions and such. This year for the rules, we incorporated a lot of answers to frequent taxpayer questions and also some practitioner questions. But just remember that some of the rules might look a little basic to you, some of the additions to the rules. That's because the rules apply to not only practitioners who know how to file appeals and everything, but also to our pro se filers. We also include additional guidance aimed at making assessment data more accurate. And also, we would like to remind everyone that the rules are designed to provide clarity and promote accurate assessments, not to create stumbling blocks for you. We do not just deny appeal submissions, provided that they substantially comply with the rules. And I'm ready for the, yeah. So this year, we created a handy new form for you. From my experience, and I know many of you all have experienced this, sometimes our clients just don't give us things that we ask for. like dated photographs that are required, or maybe utility bills, or they haven't yet filed their income taxes for that year. And the rules, it always asks that you attest to, dates of the photographs or why some of this information was missing. So we created a general attestation form for you to use in these situations. It's very similar to the general affidavit form. And these both forms are designed to give you the freedom to incorporate any information as needed to make your appeals as complete and descriptive as possible. The next slide, here's the two forms side by side. I would suggest nobody agonize over which form to use when. We have, again, a lot of pro se filers who don't understand maybe attestation, what that means. And so we call it something general attestation. They know exactly what to use. We trust that you all could look at both forms and see which one that you want to use when, or keep using your own forms that serve the same purpose. Appeal Rule 4, generally, all appeals should be filed through Smart File. And this rule just provides additional contact information and suggestions for taxpayers who may not have reliable internet access. Generally, this is something that, again, is aimed more at our pro se filers. However, it could be very useful for practitioners as well, because sometimes the internet just crashes. And next slide. Rule 5 provides that property is part of a real estate investment fund. Basic fund details should be provided to our office, such as the name and address of the fund, and also the current underlying value is set forth in the fund's annual reporting documents. The reason that we are looking for this information is so that we would like to see that property market values found in county records are consistent with other information being provided to investors and or for Cook County properties. And after this rule, you will notice that the rules are one off from what they were last year. That's because the certificate of error rule has been moved to a new section about corrections of errors specifically. Anyway, Rule 9 basically states that any taxpayer who reasonably believes that the data on our website is incorrect should go ahead and alert our office during the appeals process by providing the corrected information. Things like square footage, building age, exterior construction, classification of the property. Go ahead and include that information in your appeal, and please clearly state what the problem is and the correction needed. You can bold it, whatever it is that you need to just make sure it's really crystal clear for us to see. There is also a section in Smart File you can use for this purpose for residential properties. And we also ask that you please provide sufficient information as evidence in support of the needed change. For instance, if there's been an addition and now you have additional square feet, or maybe you've had a fire and when you rebuilt, it's smaller. Things like building plans can be helpful for that purpose. And the next slide. Rule 17 has been updated specifically for purchase price. We wanted to provide more guidance as to what types of documents to provide. The basics for most types of transactions are the deed, purchase agreement, closing statement. Provide the identities of both the buyer and seller, plus any relationship between them. If it's a short sale, we would ask that you please advise us. Now, for forced sales, I understand that you're not necessarily going to have a purchase agreement, a closing statement, but just if you could provide relevant documentation showing the forced sale, such as a judicial deed, tax deed, a trustee's deed from the bankruptcy court, or relevant court orders such as an order approving sale, things like that are very helpful to us. And there's also a form that we've had out there on our website for a long time that makes this pretty easy. It's the sales questionnaire form. If we could get the next slide, it just shows what the sales questionnaire form looks like. It's some of you use it, some of you don't. It just provides spaces for all this information, that helps us with sales information. Rule 18 regarding appraisals. Appraisals should be US PAP compliant and dated within the same triennial. Some of the things that our valuations department said they've noticed about some appraisals coming in is that sometimes appraisers don't include the sales history within the last 3 years. Sometimes they'll use comparables outside of the market area, or maybe things like using a comparable that's been demolished for property that is not demolished. So those are just some things for you all to look out for when you're reviewing their appraisal before you upload your appeal. And for those of you who may have missed this rule last year, the appraisal summary form is no longer required, so you don't have to fill that out. Oh, and please do remember that appraisals are estimates of value, and our analysts may or may not agree with your appraisal estimation of value. If you have a disagreement with us on valuations, I know that you all know you can go on to the Board of Review. Rule 19 addresses the ever popular RPI form. It's a form required for income producing properties, which are those that generate rental income. These properties may be either wholly or partially non-owner occupied. Hotels and motels are always considered income producing properties, whether or not they're owner occupied. And please remember the RPI form is not required for classes 211 or 212. It's not required for residential properties in general. So I had seen some appeals that include like a protest letter about having to use this form for residential properties. You don't have to give us that type of letter because it's simply not required by the rules. Rule 20 provides more guidance on vacancy filings. Date stamped photos of both the interior and exterior spaces are required. And again, if a client cannot get you dated photographs, you can always use a general attestation form to fill in the date the photographs were taken. And then also we have the vacancy affidavit. It provides spaces again that you need for all the information that we ask for. We do understand that some filers use the general affidavit to provide vacancy information for residential properties with 6 units or less. If that's something you normally do and you're comfortable with, that is fine for you to do so. Although I believe that's mostly pro se filers who use that form. But we do strongly encourage the use of the vacancy affidavit. And the next slide shows generally what it looks like. I'm sure that most practitioners know what this form looks like, but in case you've not used it before, it's 2 pages, it's pretty easy. There's a checklist and it provides spaces. And still this year in Rule 2, as stated in Rule 25, we're still not accepting re-reviews of our valuation decisions. If you have a difference of opinion regarding the valuation given by our office post-appeal, you may always file a further appeal with the Cook County Board of Review. And this year we added the Cook County Board of Review's information to our rule because we have found that many pro se filers really aren't aware of being able to go to the board. I know that practitioners are aware, but again, we're trying to make the rules a bit more inclusive of all types of filers. Rules 26 through 28, this is a new section we added on the corrections of errors. Our office has the statutory authority to correct errors of assessments outside of the appeals process through the certificate of error, certificates of correction, and we may also make assessor recommendations to the Board of Review. And we can correct all types of errors this way. And if when reviewing our decisions, if you believe that we have made an error in the assessment of your property, you can go ahead and reach out to us regarding the error. The rule itself gives some methods to reach out to us. And it can be done either through or outside of the appeal process. We do ask that that, it be used to correct errors as opposed to argue a difference in opinion and valuation. But, if you feel we've made an error, obviously you need to reach out to us. And the final rule is for certificates of error. We ask that you provide evidence with your certificate of error applications. This is more, again, something for pro se filers, although we do see some law firm filings that really don't have a lot of evidence attached to the certificate of error applications. The same types of evidence used in an appeal can be used for certificate of error. And you can continue to file these applications either as part of your regular tax year appeal, or you can file it outside of that process. Currently, we still have it so that you use Smart File if you're filing with your regular year appeal, and then the email if you are filing outside of that process. But we're hoping to have all certificates of error be able to be filed by Smart File by the end of the year. And the next slide, perhaps even sooner than that. There's the email again that you send the certificates of error to that are not filed with your regular year's appeal. And then the final part of the rules are, again, reiterating that for exemptions, if your client has an IDOR letter for a property tax exemption, you don't have to file an appeal to get that activated. Just send it and some ownership information to our exempt email, assessor.exempt@cookcountyl.gov, and then we can go ahead and process that.
Thanks, Gina. We are going to send a copy of the appeal rules to everyone once we have the presentation's over with and we've got some follow-up information for them. But thanks for taking us through kind of some of the big changes for this year. We are going to get to questions in just a little bit. Tasha has been busy answering some of the questions that are sort of specific to particular practitioners, but we do have a couple of general questions we'll get to in just a bit. I wanted to give a couple updates on some things related to the data subscription. This is just more of a heads up on some things. I know there are many questions about the data subscription, and we're not going to address all of them here today. We will be following up with those who are data subscription subscribers with more information, but we're making a few updates to the data subscription this year. First of all, we're going to be retiring some data fields. There are some that were used in the mainframe that are not in the IS World system. The IS World system is the assessor's office system of record going forward for assessments. And so data fields that are no longer used will be removed from the data subscription service. There will be some new data fields, however, that will be added. We're going to be replacing some retired data fields, such as the HIE value, and replacing them with, so when you do see changes to the data subscription, those are going to be as intended. Ahead of the opening of the North Suburban reassessment, we will be sending a full list of all the changes we're going to be making to the data subscription. In addition, there will be a data file added to the subscription. They'll be created to transmit appeal information, certificate of error, sales, and divisions. So there will be some changes to that data subscription this year. So be sure to be on the lookout for those. There are also a few changes to online filing. I know in our questions, we got something about making it easier to find the RPI code. Well, this year in the online appeal system, when you are filing an appeal, when you do a search on that particular PIN, you do see the search results and you click on the Start Filing button in order to begin your appeal filing. And you'll notice that this year there's a new field and it says RPI code. So you won't have to email the assessor's office to get a copy of the RPI code if that mailing has been lost for some reason. We're trying to make this easier to file, and we thought that making it easier to find the code would be a good step forward for that. So going forward in the online appeal system, when you start an online appeal, you will see the RPI code right there. So we're hoping that it makes it easier to take care of that. Also, there will be changes to the residential appeal form. So for those of you who are very familiar with the online appeal system, there were two residential appeal forms. There was sort of a basic residential appeal form, and then one that allowed you access to the comparable search functionality. As we have made changes to the online appeal system, we have now grouped all of the residential appeal forms under one choice. So you don't have to decide between the two residential appeal forms. You now have access to everything you need under the residential appeal for comp search underneath a single residential appeal. And then, as Gina indicated, we will be creating an online certificate of error for valuations. We're estimating that that should be available around August 2022, so end of the summer. And that consolidated form is going to allow for standalone filings of certificate of errors. You won't have to use the email address for that in the future. Finally, we're going to be creating a new system for getting access to data that you normally have to FOIA for. We understand that obviously we get a lot of FOIA requests, and people would prefer to have access to that information as quickly as possible. So we're going to be rolling out the public access platform, which will allow people to get access to all kinds of information. You can see some of the information there, information about divisions and sales, HIE information. All of that information will be listed on our website. Going forward, we estimate that this will be available starting next month. So this will be well in advance of the North Suburban reassessment. We are hoping that this takes care of a huge problem of requiring folks to go through the FOIA department in order to get access to information from the assessor's office. So we are really trying to make as much information available online as possible. And we think this is going to be a big step forward in that. So those are the major points that we wanted to cover here today. I'm going to stop sharing and just go to some of the Q&A information that we had. We do have a couple things about the data subscription. That is information that we're going to follow up with. I'm just going to take note of those questions and make sure that we are getting back to you on those. We know there's a couple things about secondary improvement information and other info about the data subscription that we do need to answer. So we're going to be following up on that. So everyone who registered for this event will get the answers to those follow-up questions on the data subscription. And we did address, I think, one of the questions about RPI and making that more easily available. So I'm going to ask a question first about vacancy affidavits. And Gina, I'm going to have you answer this question. Are vacancy affidavits required for 211 and 212 or any class 2 properties?
They're not. We encourage their use because it really provides space for you to fill out all the information that we request in the rules. However, we understand that many are used to using the general affidavit for that purpose instead, and it's okay for you to keep using that. However, the vacancy affidavit is very handy, so I would recommend you use it simply for ease of presenting the information, and just some of it you can just really check boxes off.
Okay. And we had a question on the assessor's view on consulting firms filing a complaint at the assessor's office. Tasha, I wonder if that's something that you want to follow up on or answer now. I'm not quite sure the extent of that answer.
Could you repeat the question? I was reading others.
Oh, sure. The question was, what is the assessor's view on consulting firms filing a complaint at the assessor's office?
So currently that is permissible. That's been the case for some time. Consultants or attorneys may file at the assessor's office. As we know, the rules are different at other levels of appeal.
Okay. And then there is a question about bulk order printouts the day of opening. They've had to wait for printouts. Has the turnaround time changed for 2022? I know a lot of the information that we're trying to deliver is online through electronic means. I think most of that information we're trying to make available through the GovQA program.
Yeah, so I mean, the FOIA responses, we're doing what we can to speed up that process. That information should be available during that time for appeal. And then eventually that will be posted on our website as well.
And if you have the RPI code, do you need to submit client's approval to file an RPI? I think generally, if an appeal is needed to be filed, you do have to file an RPI. So there is not a need for a separate client approval to file an RPI. It is just as if you are authorized to be the representative of record, you're authorized to file an appeal with them. And so you're therefore authorized to file the RPI as well. There was a question that's kind of rather specific, and I'm not sure if it's necessary for us to address it fully here, because this seems like more of a valuations question. Appraisers have difficulty appraising completely vacant properties. Is it appropriate for the appraiser to value the property as if it were fully occupied and then apply the 40% reduction per the assessor's vacancy policy, or is the appraiser required to value the property vacant? One thing I would say is, our vacancy policy is applied based on the analyst's valuation decision. So it is not a 40% across the board reduction. The vacancy policy kind of is, let's say, a graduated scale based on the property value itself. In terms of how the appraiser should be valuing that, I'm not sure if we're able to provide some specific advice there. I don't know if either of my colleagues want to chime in on that one.
I think that would be one that would be best answered by valuations to give more complete information on what the analyst would be looking for, which is, I believe, what is what the practitioners would prefer to hear.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we'll follow up on that question. There's a question about the attorney authorization form and whether the section on refinance information and percentage is going to be removed at all. Gina or Tasha, do you have an answer on that one?
It's still on the form. It's not been removed.
Okay. And rule number 9, will that initiate a field check request when making changes to any characteristics in the filing portal? Tasha, I think you were endeavoring to answer that one.
So I don't think that it necessarily does. It depends on what's being presented, the type of information. So if it were me, I would probably provide that information as well as request a field check.
Okay. And then a question, I think we might have answered this one. Is an appraisal required for each and every year? Or is it just the most recent year for the triennial reassessment?
Generally, it should be dated within the tri. If the property really changes a lot during the tri and you're using appraisal evidence, it would probably be best in that case to provide a new appraisal. But generally, if the property is remaining more or less the same, one appraisal per tri, particularly for big commercial, for any type of commercial industrial properties, is appropriate, and residential too, really. But commercial and industrial are generally when appraisals are used more.
Okay. There's a couple questions about 2022. We anticipate being open for 2022 appeals in the next couple weeks. I don't have an exact date at this point, but once we do have an exact date, that information will appear on the calendar, the appeal and deadlines calendar, which is available online. At that point, we will have any 2022 forms available as well. I know that there's been some changes, and I'm not sure, Gina or Tasha, if either of you is able to answer this one, but there's a question about preventing double dockets. I know that's been an issue in the past. Can you speak to any of the things that we're doing to kind of prevent that going forward, or is that still kind of a work in progress?
So I can speak to that briefly. It's a work in progress. We are doing something within the Smart File system, which is the intake system that, when you're filing through the website, that's what you're using. And so it's intended to drastically cut down on the double dockets, but I can't speak to the final outcome of that work that was underway. So I will check with our team and we'll get back to you on that one as well.
Okay. All right. And again, I'm just noting some of the questions we're getting here are about the data subscription service. So please know that if you're asking a question about the data subscription service, I'm just making a note of that, and you will be getting some follow-up answers on that a little bit later. So one of the questions is, we talked a little bit about ARPI codes. For folks that are needing their practitioner code, you can continue to get that through the FOIA department. That information can be provided to you by emailing assessor.foia@cookcountyil.gov. The question about the new portal, whether it's going to have the AI and Q card data, or that is information that we're planning on rolling out through this new portal. I know folks have typically wanted to get that. That has been something that you have needed to get through the FOIA department, but we are trying to fix that. Obviously, we want to make sure that that information is as readily available as possible. Someone wanted to know if other than checking the assessor's website, is there a way to file or to check if a certificate of error has been accepted? That information is usually on the website. Certificates of error are usually accepted after and processed after some of the main appeals are filed. Gina or Tasha, perhaps, I don't know if you've got anything to follow up with on that particular thing.
Just to note that if you're doing filing for a C of E only for prior year, but not filing for the current year appeal, then we will still be receiving those through that online appeals email address. As far as when they show up on the website, they should show up that they have been filed once they're processed. But again, there is a lag time often with the C of Es, with the deadlines that we have for the current year appeals, but feel free to check in and it should register online after it's been processed, even if it's not fully finally decided yet.
Okay. And Tasha, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the difference between the certificate of error and the certificate of correction. What are the differences between those two, and sort of when is which appropriate?
Sure. So both are statutory based correction provisions. The C of E always works with a prior year. So we could be looking at a C of E for a prior year, a C of E for a prior year on an omitted assessment that's on a different warrant year from its original tax year, but you're always looking back with a certificate of error. The one thing that you may think of with homestead exemptions, those are going to be processed at the time the taxes typically are about to be due, or they could be close to that time once that second installment comes out. So that's a little closer in time, but the general type of C of Es, those are always looking back to a prior year, and they can only go back so far. The certificate of correction is also based in the correction provisions of the property tax code, but that's really an opportunity for us to make a correction while the Board of Review is still active with properties in a particular township. So what happens is we submit information to the board hasn't yet closed for that town. Typically, we would be submitting those prior to the time within which taxpayers can file for an appeal, and then it's information to make a correction. So say the assessor implemented an incentive, and for some reason in the final step, it did not record on the property. And so the property was still, say, 597 or 591. And it should have been changed to a different classification. So we catch that in time before the board is done receiving appeals, and we submit information to the board to correct that. And it's done in the current year process. So that's the main difference.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just reviewing a couple other, so there's a couple questions about analyst notes and whether they'll be made accessible through SmartFile after the decision has been made. I know that part of the public access program is to make as much of it information available as possible. So we're going to be including a lot more of that information going forward. One of the things that's important to note is this year and going forward, what we've done for commercial properties is to include or is to post online a spreadsheet of every single commercial property's inputs to the commercial assessment calculation. So that's everything from vacancy to expenses, cap rates, the NOI. All that information is now available on a public filing as a spreadsheet online. If you go to cookcountyassessor.com and go to the data menu, you can select valuation reports and then go to the township in question. And underneath the commercial valuations information, you will see a blue button that links to a spreadsheet that has for every commercial property. Currently, it's just for Chicago. Every commercial property's inputs for their commercial assessment calculation. We will be posting similar information for the north suburbs when we begin assessing those commercial properties, and we'll be doing the same for the south and west suburbs going forward. That is something that we're going to be doing. Again, we're trying to put as much information available online as possible so that you don't have to FOIA for things anymore. There's a question about filing for correction of square footage outside of the appeal window. I believe that is something that can be filed, but we generally correct that information on once it's corrected online. It's after the closing of a particular township. For corrections to square footage, Gina or Tasha, are there particular documents that folks could provide that would help correct this information?
Things like building plans, appraisals should have correct square footage in them, surveys, things like that really should have the information, maybe building specifications, if you're building a house, things like that. So just something, an official kind of document that would show the square footage. Sometimes a lease might have that information. So there's various documents that have that information that you can use.
Thanks. There was a question about field checks and whether they're required for vacancy. I wonder, Gina or Tasha, if you could answer that question. There's a question about whether you can see if they've been done in the new system. That will be something that's part of public access. And you will be able to see the results of that field check. But are there field checks still required for vacancy?
So I think they should be requested. Our field team and in conjunction with valuations will make decisions on when field checks are conducted. And I don't have those details, but again, we can get more information and get back to you. I know that typically with vacancy requests, there is some sort of check. But what I do know is they also have these up-to-date, technology tools that are used, such as Eagle View pictometry and things like that, that can zone in on recent aerial photos that are helpful. So that's why I won't say in absolutely every case, but you should request one if you're looking for vacancy relief.
Okay. And a question on appraisal. If an appraisal is dated 2020, can that be used for the 2021 try? Or I assume similarly for the 2022 try, if it's an appraisal dated 2021, if that's using 2018 and 2020 comps, is that an appraisal that we would accept? Gina, you're
all right.
on.
I was having trouble clicking my microphone, embarrassing. But I mean, if you use an older appraisal, you just make the risk that it might not be given the weight that you would like for it to be given by our analysts. So, that might be a business decision to make, but we do strongly encourage that your appraisal be dated within the try.
Okay. And there's a question about square footage for condos and commercial industrial properties and whether that will be on the website. I'm going to talk with some of the folks. I believe this information is going to be contained within the new public access tool, but I'm going to check on that, and that'll be a follow-up question we send. So for non-income producing commercial properties, obviously for income producing properties, we ask for an RPI filing. For those that are non-income producing, is there sort of an equivalent form that we're asking folks to file?
Could you say that again, Scott? Not an RPI, but what type of property?
A non-income producing property. Is there sort of a equivalent form that we would ask folks to file in order to verify the information on that property?
Well, if they're submitting information that requires an attestation, they can use the general form that was created, or if there's a particular issue such as supporting photos submitted that are not dated, things like that. But as far as the income information, obviously that wouldn't apply if it's not that type of property.
We did get a question about updating the smart filing portal to allow for entering a PIN with or without the hyphens. I'm not sure if that's something that we have complete control over. This is smart file is something that we do receive through a vendor, but I will certainly make a note of that request. Another question on appraisal: should it be done as of January 1st of the year in which you are appealing? So if you're appealing 2021 taxes, the appraisal should use sales in 2020 as of 2021. I guess, sort of generally speaking, Gina, when do we want to, what kind of data are we looking for on an appraisal in a particular, for a particular tax year?
Most appraisals done for ad valorem tax purposes are as of January 1st of that year. So, you know, generally that's the way that they're going to be done. Again, the closer you can get to USPAP standards, the more weight your appraisal will be given. So just go through it, make sure that they're using reasonable sales comps, you know, that they're using reasonable capitalization rates, things like that, so that your appraisal is given more weight. Just when you get it, review it, make sure that it's what you want. And if it's not, you can always go back to the appraiser and say, hey, I really think you need to improve this section. So just look at them, give us the best information that you can.
And there was a question about whether to attach closing docs as an exhibit if you are not using the sale as a basis for arguing value. As long as you disclose the sale through the and the attorney authorization form, do you need to attach closing docs?
So whether or not you're using it for the estimation or your support of a market value, the rules request that the documentation be submitted when there is a sale within the 2 years of the year in question. So we're looking for that information because we're trying to gather all relevant information. Now, if you have information to indicate why this is not an arm's length transaction, that should be among either your narrative, your attestation, things like that, that you're submitting on behalf of your client, because of course you'll be representing them as well as you can. But the information gives us more indication of the market value, which is what the assessor is looking for.
Okay. There's a question about recently filed appeals and CFEs with the CCAO and those documents being sent directly to the property owner instead of the practitioner. My understanding is that that information, appeal results and whatnot, is sent to the practitioner. That's assuming that we have that information available on file. So I don't believe that there's been a change in policy there. So if that information is not being, for whatever reason, being sent to the property owner, we may not have the practitioner information available online. So I would just contact the FOIA department to make sure that we have your information correct. There's a question about smart file and help stopping comparable properties being inputted incorrectly under the associated PINs section. It's difficult for us to know whether you are incorrectly entering a comparable property. So I would just suggest checking those carefully to make sure that the information is being submitted correctly. So there's a question about, since there is no re-review at the assessor's office, if there is a correction that needs to be made, certificate of error being the only way to address certain kinds of issues. Can these be seen as a double docket if it's the same issue being represented? Tasha, I wonder if you could take that one.
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. The question is that if someone filed an appeal, we don't have re-review, so then they come back with a C of E in the next year, or are you talking about a C of E only like after the town closes? So you wouldn't be able to file the C of E in the current year. You'd have to do it in a subsequent year for this year that you're looking for that change. But that is something. So say you think there is some mistake, there is an error that needs to be corrected, we didn't get it. Obviously, you can call that to our attention. You can reach out to the board. You can appeal there. If you're unsuccessful, but you're sure that there is an error, then of course you can file in the next year for a C of E in addition to any appeal that you file for that property. It would not be considered a double docket.
Okay. And if a condo is using sales as part of its appeal argument, must the sales square footage be the same as theirs? I think it's just kind of a general question about what we consider as comparables.
Yeah, so with condominiums, we're always going to look at percentage of ownership. And, of course, it matters if something is 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, things like that, the utility of the unit. But if something is a smaller unit, then that would be considered in the sales price and how indicative that is of the subject property's market value.
Okay. There's a question about whether someone can request vacancy relief on top of an as-is appraisal. Generally speaking, an appraisal, as Gina said, is an opinion of value. The vacancy reductions that are granted as part of the decision on the appeal. So the appraisal is taken into account, as well as any arguments that are being made for vacancy. So I don't believe it's necessarily one on top of the other so much as it is kind of the two working in concert there together. The question about the general attestation form is a question of just, is that available under the commercial industrial section as well as residential? Just making a note that we've seen that, and we'll double check that on the website. And again, if you've submitted a data subscription question or kind of a general data display question, we're just making a note of that, and we will be offering some follow-ups on those. For certificate of corrections, what's the process for submitting a request for a certificate of correction?
Well, that's a good question. So I think you would want to contact one of us via email unless we have something set up on the portal for a certificate of correction request. I'm not aware that we do. Smart File is typically open during the town filings time period. So it looks like we'll be adding to our email boxes for those for the moment.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, and with 365 participants on here, that's a scary thought.
So that brings to a close our event today. So just a reminder that we will be posting the slides as well as the appeal rules in an email to you later this week. In addition, we will be sending answers to some of these data subscription questions that folks have. I want to thank everybody for their time and appreciate your attention. This presentation will be available on YouTube, and we will post a link to